The Division 2 released with an extremely accurate map of Washington, D.C., all the way down to the specific buildings, but that has us asking, why? As graphics improve and we inch closer to Moore's Law, meaning almost nothing, innovation in gaming has begun to take on new forms. You can't market a game on smooth facial animations and frame rates alone, which means game makers have to figure out new ways to make games catch your attention with technical goodies. For example, we've seen the real world reflected more and more closely in games. Rather than drawing inspiration from a general setting like European town or inside an exploding barrel factory, studios are increasingly recreating actual cities and parts of the world. Most recently is Ubisoft's Tom Clancy's The Division 2. Good lord, what a title. A game that has made a big deal about recreating Washington, D.C.
We have all kinds of information, almost too much information. We know the type and age of every tree and location of all the park benches.
Beyond DC's most well-known landmarks, the design team went a step further and recreated every street, down to the restaurants on the corner and probably the dog shit right under your shoe. Yes, games are that realistic now. When VentureBeat jokingly mentioned to Division 2 creative director Julian Garrity that DC residents wouldn't be able to recognize their apartments in the game, Garrity responded, no, 100% they should be able to do that. This is one-to-one. If it's in DC and the map we've recreated, there's a great likelihood you'll be able to recognize the streets. This is a notable step up from the Division 1's rough approximation of a snowy Manhattan, and illustrates what developers can do with current technology. This is all cool. And I'd like to dive into the tech because it is really interesting, but I can't help but wonder how important this level of realism actually is. We'll get back to this in a minute, but first I'd like to talk about the good dinosaur.
Whoa, what?
Yes, you all laughed when I said I'd work the good dinosaur into every video we make, so who's laughing now? Shouldn't bang the table. Ubisoft used a couple of techniques to accurately develop their Washington, D.C. map, specifically LiDAR and GIS data. LiDAR is a surveying technology that uses lasers to measure reflected light, and the method was used in conjunction with GIS data to make the one-to-one Washington that Ubisoft PR had such a field day promoting.
Washington, D.C. Iconic monument.
DC.
The nation's capital, Washington, D.C.
If you're not familiar with GIS, that's Geographic Information Systems data. It's a collection of map data used by the U.S. Geological Survey, NASA, and yes, even Pixar. In 2015, Pixar's The Good Dinosaur released to tepid reviews. You probably already forgot about it. Yet, director Peter Sohn had insisted on shooting the film in the actual American West, being an animated movie that presented a few challenges. Namely, there are no cameras. So the team downloaded publicly available topographical data from the USGS, 65,000 square miles of it, and then rendered a landscape from all the information, resulting in stunning photorealistic backdrops. All this work produced an absurd 300 terabytes of data. That's a lot of work and an awful lot of hard drive space for a movie that's not even in the top 10 dinosaur movies of all time.
Not if Tammy has anything to say about it. Tammy and the T-Rex.
This feels like a good time to mention that the Land Before Time franchise has 14 films. Now, they may not all be winners, but you have to respect Universal for playing the numbers game on that one. This is all to say that a strict attention to detail and meticulous recreation of real-world places doesn't necessarily make for the best experiences. I mean, hell, I imagine friendly, good dinosaurs around me all day in the real world for free. I don't need to pay $20 to see 90 minutes of it in the theater. And yes, I wasted money on D-Box. I'm that kind of guy. Yet, still, there's this pervasive attitude that the better a game looks, the more fun it will be. It's an assumption that's been around in games culture for decades. I mean, this has been thrown to a lot, but when gamers got their first glimpse of The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, that's gamers with a capital G, by the way, the childish and cartoony art style infuriated them. This is 2001. It's time for the big boy games. I demand myself a delicate elf boy that looks real. Give Ganon a Glock and a coke habit. Make Zelda a cyber assassin or something. They actually kind of did that later. And it was awesome, so I don't know where I'm going with that one, but as one commenter put it back in the day, quote, I think there will be a few suicides within the next 24 hours, not to mention death threats to that fuckface that designed the game. He was probably right. Whoever that person is now, I'm sure that they stand by their initial statements. They probably have it tattooed on their back or their neck, depending on how dedicated they are. Nintendo was, as they often are, ahead of the curve in understanding that a quality experience doesn't entirely depend on the tech behind it. And this was in an age when tech was an extremely limiting factor in game design. All these years later, when graphics and lighting and frame rates and huge worlds have been made widely accessible, major studios are kind of learning this lesson that looks really good isn't really a main selling point anymore. It's led to a lot of experimentation with mechanics like the Nemesis system, pseudo-online features, and as we've seen a lot lately, the urge to make games true to life as possible. Replicating real-life settings one-to-one would make a lot more sense if it were something that had been missing from games, but games have been doing it pretty well with fictional worlds for a long time now. Even if a game does need to take place in a grounded, seemingly real setting, many games have taken inspiration from real-life locations and used them to influence their own creations. There's an undeniable charm to places like Saint-Denis and Novigrad, despite not being technically real. And there are plenty of games that feature their own takes on real cities. Rockstar has twice produced a warped, condensed version of Los Angeles. There are landmarks reminiscent of the actual place, but the developers created an experience that was all their own by taking the best pieces and shuffling them into a form that served the game the best. So it all begs the question, do we really need the one-to-one depictions of real-life locations in games? The short and easy answer is no, but that doesn't mean we aren't going to see a lot more of it in the future. In its 2018 I/O conference, Google announced a tool that allows developers to build games out of real-world data using the company's Google Maps API. It's a natural progression of the kind of digital tourism that Google Street View and Google Earth has made possible over the recent years, packing all the data of the world around us and making it accessible to creators who likely have fewer resources than a full studio. All of this is good and fine. The tools are there, developers are implementing them, and we're beginning to make our world a digital playground. But do you really need to turn around and see your apartment building? Trash heap? I try to get away from it. It's novel, sure, and novelty can be fun, but it actively works against video games as escapism. If I lived in that particular part of Washington, D.C., the last thing I'd want to do is come home and screw around in an online version of my own neighborhood, even if it's freshly restocked with gun crates, bandana-wearing bullet magnets, and random walkie-talkies that tell you about something that happened 20 years ago. Focusing so much on a faithful rendering of a real city is also liable to affect other parts of a game's design. When obeying the exact layout of city streets, that's going to seriously constrict the artistic license designers can take in making the game. At a certain point, the map is just not designed to justify the gameplay or experience that a player will have, and then that relationship reverses. So here's an example. In Final Fantasy XV, I'd often set a destination for the other side of the map, and along the way, I'd uncover all sorts of detours and side adventures and go off and do all sorts of things that led me into experiences I never would have sought out on their own. But since they were on the side of my path, I wanted to explore them. Before I know it, I'm eating french fries and having a true heart-to-heart with my bros under the stars. Turns out the real treasure were the french fries we ate along the way. This is common in modern game design and engenders a sense of natural discovery. That holds true to some extent in The Division 2, but it's not to the same degree, given that the game exists in a predetermined framework. If anything, it feels more like the developers had to work in reverse to cram as many question marks and activity icons all along the streets and alleyways of the city versus a world that lives in harmony with all of its activities. It's reminiscent of Red Dead Redemption 2, which ostensibly a great game, but Rockstar's almost stubborn commitment to realism often got in the way of playing the game itself. Weapon loadouts reset every time you take your horse anywhere, and there's a near total lack of fast travel. It makes going long distances start to feel really painful. Remember stalking that animal for 10 minutes only to realize you left your gun back at the horse? Foul language may not drop a 3-star buck, but it if it's not worth trying at that point. It is good that AAA studios are looking for what's next and considering how to innovate, and that often means throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. The Division 2's impressive rendering of Washington, D.C. is neat, and it's sure to turn a few heads from in and outside of gaming, but it's ultimately not necessary to make a game great. If every studio decided that every sequel had to feature an exact replica of whatever city it's set in, we'd lose a lot of creative expression in pursuit of a weird assumption that we all just want to live in a video gamey version of our own world. In the end, games are strongest when they embrace being games and all the liberties that can come with. That means abandoning the desire to emulate other forms of media, whether it's books, movies, or real life itself. Granted, it takes a lot more effort, time, creativity, people, money, everything really, to adapt real spaces to virtual ones. And that's not even to mention creating virtual ones just from the ground up. But it's those unique spaces that we have our unique video game experiences in. That's when those locations start to take on a personality and a reality all their own. Something a little more profound than just a video game copy of real life. Thank you for watching. This is Insight Games. Hey everyone, welcome to the review for Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. I'm Lawrence. I played as much of the game as I possibly could, and I'm a little short on sleep because of it, but I did it for you, the gamers. I'm joined by Bruce and Adam. How would you describe your relationship with From Software and the Souls series?
I mean, in the office, Bruce and I are basically known as the Souls veterans.
We're the experts.